This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com. Let me ask you about something that happens when this episode airs, because as I mentioned, this is for the syndicated show Pro. We would see a commercial that aired on both Pro and Worldwide, where there's a commercial for the Crockett Cup VHS. Now, of course, this is the 87 version. But we often hear about when he worked for Vince McMahon's WWF, he had so many products out there that were licensed and what have you, that you would get a royalty statement that sometimes would be inches thick of everything that had been scanned with your likeness on it, everything that had been sold, all the returns and what have you. And I'm just curious, I know this is a much smaller promotion, but this is very much the era, 1987, where you're starting to hear guys like, man, did you hear the Iron Sheik got 300 grand or 80 grand or whatever the number was for his doll? Of course, we know that was the LJN action figure, but are you seeing any sort of royalties or any sort of bump in pay or any consideration for things like the Crockett Cup VHS? Arn showing us the letter 0 with his hands. So I guess that's a no.
It's hard to even speak about it because really, when you go back and think about it, it just is not right. But again, in that same mouthful, I'm making more money, Conrad, than I've ever made in my life.
Right.
More than I ever dreamed. And I certainly, because I wasn't aware, I guess, of the fact that I was entitled to some of that VHS money. And that was just the right thing to do. And, you know, there's times in this business where you have to stop and go, hey, hold on a minute. This is just wrong. Here's the right thing to do where I'm concerned. That would have been one of those times, because I would imagine we were selling as many of those VHS tapes as anybody else.
You know, I don't know that we ever got any figures. It's a different animal because the tapes sold for more money, but they weren't as readily available. It was kind of a hard thing to get. I mean, I guess you could write in and send a check and what have you, but it was a totally different era. So it's interesting for me to think about how well monetized something like that would have even been. But to your point, no matter what it was, you got 0. But it's not as if the Crockett's were flush with cash. Of course, we know they're already running in the red here by 87, and it's just going to get worse as we move on into 88. I do want to ask about something else that started to be promoted. This Pro episode that aired on June 6th is the first time we hear Jim Crockett Jr. talk about the Match Beyond. And he says that that is going to debut as a part of the Atlanta Omni stop for the Great American Bash Tour. So when the Great American Bash Tour for 87, which was a success in 86, depending on who you ask, when it rolls into Atlanta and you're at the Omni, which is, you know, one of the 2 biggest arenas and most important arenas that Jim Crockett runs, we're going to debut something they're calling the Match Beyond. What did you think of that concept? When did you hear it called that? And when did you know what in the heck War Games was going to be?
Well, probably the same time the fans did. You know, it was the concept alone. You know, I don't remember exactly when. Okay, here's my vision for War Games. Doom, 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 doom. I don't remember when that is, but I just remember whenever that was, whatever the date, I went, that's interesting. The concept was you had this 30 minutes of blood and guts that neither team could win until everyone was in the cage, and then you could determine a winner. That was the first time anything like that had ever, I think, been on TV, been on air, been in a live event. I mean, just the concept. You got to go 30 minutes. Once everyone's in the cage, now you can determine a winner. That whole concept was interesting to me.
No doubt about it. I mean, it is still probably one of the favorites of everybody listening to this. And a lot of that is because of what you guys did in the first one. And we're going to talk about that. I'm just saying, it's so crazy to think. I mean, this is a time where, and I realize that I say that tongue in cheek and some of our listeners may not get the context, But here in 1987, Vince McMahon, who, make no mistake, is the biggest promoter in wrestling by a country mile, as we say here in the South, he's still flying commercial. But the doggone Horsemen and the Crockett's, nay. They got not one, but two private planes. It really is unbelievable when you think about it in hindsight. But unfortunately, maybe that's part of the reason that there's still a WWF and there's not a Jim Crockett Promotions.
Well, yeah, he figured out, it doesn't matter if you're getting marketing checks or you're getting your payoff check for the week's work or the 2 weeks or whatever it was. Big checks all going into the same account will wake you up, and it'll make you forget about how difficult the travel is. I mean, when you're getting 40, 50, I heard the Iron Sheik, this has went up and down as far as the number. I heard he got a 80 grand quarterly marketing check when his figures just came out. Now I've heard 60, I've heard everything in between, but say it was 60, that's for a quarter. That's free money because they put out a figure on you, a wrestling doll. When you get a couple of those, it wakes you up to, hey, I got an early flight. I'll just buy another alarm clock in case I don't hear the first one. You figure out it's well worth the swap.
So let's move on. I just want to add some context to my Ted DiBiase thing. He debuted for Vince in May, but I think it's like the end of June or very early July before we see the $1 Million Man character. So maybe that's why it snuck on the air here. Either way, you're back on the road, Greenville, South Carolina. Here you come on June 8th. And it's going to be Arn Anderson teaming up with Lex Luger to take on Jimmy Garvin and Kendall Windham. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.